to go find out. And according to his journal that they found much later, he basically met with UFOs, Nazi UFOs.
The Nazis had a flying saucer.
Had made a deal, basically, working with
What?
You've never heard this?
No.
It's the greatest story ever, bro.
When you think about the continents on our planet, one name that rarely gets mentioned is Antarctica. And in many ways, it's by design. Antarctica is known to many as nothing but a frozen wasteland with little to no attractive resources that can appeal to anyone. However, recent findings have shown that this perception might not necessarily be correct. Sure, Antarctica is a large swathe of ice where almost nothing grows. However, this isn't to say that the continent doesn't hold its own mysteries. Recently, more attention has been paid to Antarctica and the interesting things that have gone on there. And to hear those with insider knowledge say it, this continent just might be the most interesting of all continents. For instance, what if I told you that while the entire world was busy fighting a world war, some people were over in Antarctica communicating with aliens? Sounds crazy, right? Well, stick around, because we're about to dive into one of the most interesting regions of the world and the many nefarious activities that have been going on there. The mystery of Antarctica. The world as we know it has 7 continents, but generally, we know almost all there is to know about 6: Africa, Asia, Europe, Oceania, South America, and North America. Antarctica is the final frontier, the last piece of the puzzle, which has, well, puzzled many experts. For those who might not know, Antarctica is the southernmost continent in the world. It holds the South Pole and is found just south of the Antarctic Circle, one of the smallest continents in the world, bar just Oceania and Europe. Antarctica is also the least populated. It's also the windiest and driest of the continents, although the fact that it has the highest elevation means it is also the coldest continent by far. Interestingly, despite being the coldest, Antarctica is also classified as a polar desert. Precipitation isn't overly high on the continent, and instead, its cold is pretty much inherent. Due to the intensity of the cold, as well as several other factors, not many people live in Antarctica. That's pretty understandable, of course. It's not like people will want to stay in a frozen wasteland where there's no food or warmth. Most sources claim that less than 5,000 people live here, most of whom are scientists on sponsored expeditions and research projects. So it's not exactly like most of these people even want to live there. They just basically have to be there for a bit, and then they bounce. With its status as the world's southernmost continent, there is still a lot that we don't know about Antarctica. That said, there actually have been some interesting findings about this continent. And over the years, in fact, these findings have been shrouded in some controversy. A lot of experts are convinced that there is more to Antarctica than meets the eye. And to be fair, there have been some truly startling discoveries made here that have changed the way we see it. Operation High Jump and the Nazi alien theory. In recent times, one person who has really been interested in the secrets of Antarctica has been Joe Rogan. We all know who Joe is. He's the popular comedian who started his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, and grew it into becoming literally the most popular podcast in the entire world. On his podcast, Joe talks about pretty much everything, from scientific research to topics that seem like conspiracy theories. However, when it comes to the subject of Antarctica, it kind of seems like Joe has struck a topic that straddles the line between both. To start with, Joe has recently been intrigued by the prospect of Antarctica being linked with alien activity. And while this might seem like some insane probability, several of his guests on his podcast have actually shared insights that prove it just might be a real possibility. Back in August 2002, Joe had on Sam Tripoli, a fellow podcaster and comedian. The two spoke about several interesting events, including a rather enlightening session where Sam explained one of the most daring missions to the Antarctic, Operation High Jump. Like many military expeditions, Operation High Jump has been shrouded in secrecy. I mean, Operation High Jump isn't even its official name. Instead, it's the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program. Essentially, This program was initiated by the United States Navy with the mission of exploring Antarctica to see the possibilities of military activity there. Now, for a bit of background, we all know what happened during World War II. The Nazis threatened global peace, and they were only defeated thanks to a combination of Allied forces coming together to restore global order. Following the events of World War II, the world was essentially split. Two major world powers emerged, being the United States and the Soviet Union. And among the many fields where these two countries competed, we had military might. Sensing the threat of a rising Soviet power, the US government immediately began looking into possibilities of expanding its military might across different parts of the world, and they selected Admiral Richard E. Byrd to lead an expedition to Antarctica. The Admiral was, by all accounts, a notable figure in the American military. He graduated from the United States Naval Academy and even fought in World War I. But, after that war, he became an explorer. Byrd primarily became popular back in 1926 when he and Navy Chief Aviation Pilot Floyd Bennett became the first men to complete a flight over the North Pole. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for this achievement, after which he went on to serve in the Navy. There, Byrd continued to make history, becoming the youngest man in Navy history to be promoted to the rank of Admiral. Plus, Byrd himself completed the first solo flight over the South Pole. So, the military was confident that he was the right man for the job. Anyways, World War II was won, and Washington now turned its sights to Antarctica. With Operation High Jump, the mission was clear: to explore Antarctica and conduct light military training, all with the hopes of eventually returning and establishing a military base there. The Truman administration was focused on establishing American dominance over Antarctica, and they had the perfect man to lead the mission in Admiral Byrd. In all, Operation High Jump was a pretty massive endeavor. It comprised 13 warships, 33 aircraft, and about 4,700 troops. And to date, it remains the largest American military mission to the Antarctic. Still, for all the bells and whistles, Operation High Jump lasted for just 9 months, running from August 1946 to February 1947. The explorers all came back, and they never returned to the continent. Now, you might be asking yourself, why on earth would they do this? Well, according to Sam, this was because Admiral Byrd and his men apparently made contact with unidentified flying objects and alien forces in Antarctica.
He basically met with UFOs, Nazi UFOs.
What?
Yes.
Speaking further, Sam explained that according to records written by Byrd himself, they discovered that the aliens had actually made a deal with the Nazis to leverage their advanced technology during World War II. While the entire world was focused on managing the war as it progressed, the Nazis were making deals with aliens to license their tech and become more powerful. Now, it would interest you to know that Sam hasn't been the only person to highlight this. In fact, several other experts have raised the possibility of a Nazi presence in Antarctica. This isn't the entire story. As Sam explained, the top guys at Operation High Jump, including Admiral Byrd, returned to President Truman and told him about what they saw in Antarctica. So the president decided to send a separate delegation to the frozen continent to make another deal with the aliens. Under the terms of the deal, the US government allowed the aliens to conduct experiments on American citizens, but in select places. Where? Well, let Sam himself say it.
And that's where they say Eisenhower made a deal with these aliens. That they could kidnap people and do experiments, but they couldn't just do it anywhere. They had specific places, which were our national forests.
It's pretty insane to think that our national forests might have been the site of human experiments by aliens. After all, the government has always presented these parks as places where natural conservation efforts can be done. But as it appears, there's much more to them. Still, this isn't the weirdest part of the entire story. As Sam pointed out, the pact between the government and the aliens in Antarctica was what led to the case of the Missing 411. Now, for those who might not know, the Missing 411 phenomenon refers to a series of several unsolved cases of people who were kidnapped across several national parks in the United States. These cases happened in different periods, starting around the 50s and ending at the turn of the millennium. Researchers have even made a documentary chronicling the stories of people who went to national parks and were never seen again. As Sam put it, the victims of these disappearances had several things in common. Now, is everything starting to add up to you? Well, I thought so too. If you're still doubting that aliens could have been in Antarctica all this while, consider this. Back in 2018, a satellite image captured what appeared to have been a condensed travel trail from an aircraft. You know those trails that follow airplanes when you look at them in the sky? Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Of course, there's nothing overly groundbreaking about finding an aircraft trail. However, what was especially shocking about this one was that it literally ran across the entire planet.
The entire length of the Earth, longitudinally from the North Pole to the South Pole, which is 12,000 miles.
Scientists investigating this phenomenon pointed out that an aircraft trail usually disappears in about half an hour. Such an aircraft would need to travel about 50,000 miles an hour at the very least, a speed about 10 times faster than the fastest. Well over 7 decades after his expedition to Antarctica, Admiral Byrd's discoveries are now finally being brought to light. Now, it is worth noting that there have been several questions asked about this theory, questions that have yet to be answered. For instance, if the Nazis really had struck a deal with aliens to use their technology in World War II, why is it that they never actually used it? Could it be that they didn't get the weapons out of Antarctica in time? Or did they just decide not to do anything with them? At the same time, there's also the question of the deal between the US government and the aliens. If the aliens were given the leeway to conduct experiments on American citizens, then what did the government get in return? Also, what happened to the weapons that the Nazis had? Did the US government seize them? Did the aliens return to their home planet with them? Who knows? Still, even with these questions, the prospect of Antarctica being already explored by people who are not Americans is quite intriguing. For years, we've been told Antarctica is a wasteland with nothing to offer any civilization. However, if you believe this theory, it appears that what we were led to believe is a lie. Life species located in Antarctica's waters. So far, we've generally spoken about speculations on what could be found in Antarctica. And it's understandable. The continent remains largely unexplored, which means there's still so much about it that we don't know. However, the few expeditions conducted on the continent have also revealed some rather interesting facts. For instance, scientists have found that Antarctica could very well be home to some ancient animal and plant species which, according to them, might not have been discovered before. Back in the 19th century, a Russian scientist named Peter Kropotkin was intrigued by the possibility of there being freshwater deposits under Antarctica's ice sheets. He believed that due to the immense pressure being exerted by the mass of several thousand vertical meters of ice, there could be a huge drop in the melting point at the lowest portions of the continent's ice sheet, and as a result, much of the ice could essentially become liquid water. Hoping to explore this theory, Andrei Kapista, a Russian geographer, used seismic soundings found during separate Russian Antarctic expeditions in 1959 and 1964 to measure the thickness of the ice sheets covering Antarctica. From his findings, Kapista theorized that there indeed was a subglacial lake on the continent. Eventually, additional research confirmed this hypothesis. In 1970, British scientists performed several ice-penetrating radar surveys, showing unusual radar readings that experts believed to be conclusive proof of a liquid freshwater lake just below Antarctica's ice sheet. At the same time, space-based radar studies showed that the freshwater body was in fact one of the largest lakes on the planet. By the time the results of both the Russian and British studies were combined in June 1996, experts wrote in a published report that they had indeed discovered the subglacial lake. In total, about 675 subglacial lakes have been discovered in Antarctica. The largest of them, Lake Vostok, was confirmed to have no less than 22 water cavities, averaging about 10 kilometers in depth. It was named after the Vostok, a sloop of war ship sailed by the Russian explorer Admiral Fabian von Bellingshausen, one of the men credited for discovering Antarctica. At the same time, Vostok is loosely translated to east in Russian, and because the lake was discovered in the eastern part of Antarctica, you can imagine its name is kind of befitting. The moment scientists discovered Lake Vostok, they immediately began looking for other geographical features that could be around there. By 2005, they came upon yet another discovery, an island located in the lake's central region. Less than a year later, scientists found two smaller islands just nearby. With all of this, scientists developed a theory that all of the subglacial lakes in Antarctica must be connected by a network of rivers. However, there hasn't been much evidence to support this. Even without this evidence, experts continued to perform tests and research efforts around Lake Vostok. And in February 2012, they came upon yet another interesting find. That month, Russian scientists confirmed that they had retrieved water samples from Lake Vostok. Per reports, the water was found at a depth of 11,174 feet, or 3,406 meters. The scientists even managed to find white, bubbly ice, which was much different from the ice available on the surface of Antarctica. While presenting their findings, the scientists explained that the water on the lake probably had been there for well over 14 million years, and as a result, they could essentially analyze its chemistry to get more insights about possible microbiological life that existed long before even the dinosaurs got extinguished from our planet. Mostly, the scientists believed that the lake could house cold-loving microbial life, which had already adapted to living in complete darkness. Just as our oceans have hydrothermal vents that help specific plants and animals to survive, it is very possible that the waters of Antarctica could have life bubbling just underneath them. This would mean that these life forms could live comfortably without needing access to sunlight, and they would essentially have no need to come up for air or sunlight. Over the years, there have been more findings that allude to the possible existence of ancient life forms in the frozen continent of Antarctica. For instance, back in 2007, a team of scientists confirmed that they had discovered several strange creatures in the frozen waters of the continent. Following an expedition that was part of that year's International Polar Year research effort, scientists confirmed that they found several strange creatures, including a psychedelic octopus, and others that showed striking resemblances to shrimps and corals. Besides these, the researchers also found sea cucumbers, sea urchins, and sea lilies that had existed and lived on the sea floor all this while. Despite these animals being discovered in deeper waters where there was no food, they managed to survive and even thrive. Throughout this effort, scientists found at least 30 creatures that had previously been undiscovered. In total, they managed to catalog about 1,000 species in the region. All in all, these discoveries have gone on to show that Antarctica is much more than meets the eye. While many of us initially thought that there wasn't much on the continent, it would appear that this perception was completely false. The only reason we haven't seen much on Antarctica appears to be that so much is covered by ice, and it would be almost impossible to dig through it all to discover what lies beneath. At the same time, the discoveries also show the extent to which environmental transformation has been affecting the frozen continent. The scientists who found these animal life forms explained that they were able to discover them because the Antarctic seabed had begun getting warmer, and as temperatures dropped, the overlying ice shelves on the continental floor began to deplete. This has affected marine life in Antarctica greatly, exposing many of the creatures that had so far been obscure from discovery. The mysterious history of Antarctica's past. So far, there's one fact that many experts and non-experts seem to have agreed about when it comes to Antarctica: the fact that Antarctica still holds a lot of secrets. I mean, think about it. With all the technology we've developed in our lifetime, we've only been able to deeply explore 6 continents. For now, Antarctica remains the only outlier. Now, there is the perception that Antarctica is unexplored because most people who know much about it have chosen not to reveal its secrets. And if that is true, then it definitely is unfortunate. Still, there have also been a few maverick thinkers who have done some digging about the continent and its history. And the findings are quite interesting. One man who has spent years trying to uncover the secrets of Antarctica's origins is Graham Hancock, a British researcher and explorer. Graham has a background in sociology, bagging his degree from Durham University. After working in journalism for a few years and lending his talents to several leading media houses, Graham got drawn to the investigative side. And since then, he has embarked on several missions to learn more about our world as we know it. Unlike most mainstream scientists, Graham has been more than happy to share some of his findings. And in a separate episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, he shared what he believes to be proof that Antarctica could have once been the center of the known world, home to an ancient civilization that once ruled our planet. Now, before we delve into Graham's findings, it might be worth understanding a little about the history of Antarctica. According to most sources, Antarctica was discovered by Fadej Fadejevich Bellingshausen, a cartographer and explorer of the former Russian Empire. Bellingshausen was said to have discovered the continent while on an expedition in 1920, and upon seeing it, he described it as an ice shore of extreme height. Interestingly, there are those who don't necessarily believe that Bellingshausen discovered Antarctica. For instance, there is a growing school of thought that says Edward Bransfield, an officer of the British Royal Navy, was actually the one who first saw the high mountains covered with snow that we now know as Antarctica. At the same time, some also believe that British explorer Captain James Cook was the one discoverer of Antarctica. Cook led a 3-year expedition between 1772 and 1775 to discover new lands, and although they made it to the Antarctic Circle, they were said to have eventually given up their mission. So, while they might not have discovered new land, they unwittingly found Antarctica nonetheless. Anyways, whatever you believe, it seems pretty obvious that the discovery of Antarctica happened somewhere around the late 1700s or early 1800s. However, as Graham has said, it would appear that the discovery of Antarctica came much earlier. Speaking with Joe Rogan, Graham shared details about the Bimini Road, a rock formation buried underwater in the Bahamas. The formation was discovered close to the North Bimini Islands, consisting of a northeast-southwest linear feature that spans about 0.8 kilometers. All through this region, what you mostly see are rectangular limestone rocks.
And the point is, and another point I'd like to make is Bimini today is a tiny, tiny island. But Bimini during the Ice Age was part of an enormous island. The whole Grand Bahama Bank was above water, an enormous island. And weirdly, that island turns up on an ancient map. It turns up, that's not the Bimini Road.
As with Antarctica, the discovery of Bimini Road has also been quite controversial. Most mainstream scientists believe that it is filled with rock formations, but a few maverick thinkers, including Graham, have disputed that.
The Bimini Road is not even very deep. It's only about 20 feet deep. It was one of the last things to be covered by Ice Age sea level rise, and that's why we show a graphic, a reconstruction of it above water. It's made of extremely regular blocks, megalithic blocks, on a very large scale, more than 1,000 feet in length. When you dive on it, and I've dived on it multiple times, and I went back to diving in order to dive on it again in this series.
Graham didn't stop there, though. He also explained to Joe that even though North Bimini is a relatively small island, it used to be a part of a bigger formation that existed many centuries ago. He even showed several ancient maps showing the island as part of something much larger than we see now.
Somebody, I believe, was mapping the world, was exploring the Earth during the Ice Age, and left us ancient maps that show features that only existed during the Ice Age.
That's the Orontius Phineas.
No, this is Piri Reis.
Oh, that's Piri Reis.
Just got it on the side, but down, it's on its side at the moment. But
yeah.
down there in the lower left, if you bring the cursor down, that big island down there in the lower left, that island is exactly where the Grand Bahama Banks were.
The map Graham was showing here was the Piri Reis map. It was drawn by Piri Reis, an Ottoman navigator and explorer who drew ancient maps to help fellow explorers find their way. Graham explained that many of Piri Reis's maps were inspired by older maps he gathered over his travels, and while many of these maps have been lost to time, they've still served as inspirations for other explorers who drew maps. Considering that Piri Reis had illustrations of Antarctica in his maps, Graham believes there should have been those who traced the continent in much older maps. These people, who could very much have lived as far back as the Ice Age, would have inspired Piri Reis and other explorers of his time to follow. As an added twist, Graham explained that Antarctica seems to also be visible on some of the ancient maps that inspired Piri Reis. So, while most people would claim that Antarctica was discovered just a few centuries ago, Graham believes that the discovery of this continent happened much earlier. Offering an estimate, Graham pegged the discovery of Antarctica around the 1500s. To back his point up, he alluded to a map drawn by Orontius Phineas, a French mathematician who lived from 1494 to 1555. According to Graham, Phineas's map showed a formation that looked strikingly similar to Antarctica. The difference, however, was that he referred to this region as the Southern Lands. Now, you might be asking yourself, how is it that people who lived in these times were able to draw Antarctica on their map? Well, as Graham explains, this could be proof that there was indeed an ancient civilization that lived before humans, and they could have mapped the entire area and left clues for the ancient humans. And if that is true, then it could completely shape how we view this frozen continent for good. By its mere status, Antarctica remains one of the most mysterious places on Earth. And while many have argued about the theories we've spoken about, it sure gives you cause to wonder about this continent. Still, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did aliens really settle on Antarctica? Drop your opinions in the comments.
Version of the Grand Bahama Banks during the Ice Age, and that feature running down the middle of it looks very like the Bimini Road to me.